And of course, this is growing all the time. It's not a static figure. 60% will be under the age of 18 by 2030. And we're going to see increasing pressure on the labor market. As we already see now, much of the impact of labor market pressures is on young people who are not able to find the right kind of jobs. And for those of them who want to be entrepreneurs, there isn't enough attention paid to their skills, there isn't enough attention paid to their aspirations. So you have the major issue of equity along several dimensions: social, economic, political, and so forth. When people do not, when they aspire to something and they don't get it, you tend to breed sense of hopelessness, you tend to breed disillusionment, and as we see all across the world, young people in many instances are easily attracted to things that they should ordinarily not do if they have the right jobs, if they're able to fulfill their aspirations. Next slide. Now, as the previous speaker told you earlier, we've had other reports. Some of them you can find on our website, go to unhabitat.org. You are able to, for me, the classic remains the 2010 report, when we actually articulated the notion of inequality, which we define as leveling the playing field. That report is still available. For those who want it, like I said, you can go to our website. And of course, the next one was 2012 report on where you see this wheel here is what we call the CPI, City Prosperity Index, that we came up with when I was director for that report, the State of World Cities report. It tends to measure the health of cities, prosperity of cities, productivity of cities, and so forth. And we still have the CPI now. For those who are interested, you can write to any of our colleagues here. They will let you know how to use it for your own city, how you can actually use these measures to actually track the development of your city over time. Now, you see, the difference between what we do, much of the development literature will tell you broader national parameters. What you find here are city-level parameters and factors that make cities like Surabaya, like Jakarta, what makes them different from other cities of the world, not so much at the national level, but also at the city level. We've had some countries also prepare reports. We've had India, China, Nigeria. We had Sierra Leone, for instance, a report that was promoted by UNDP, which actually copied our framework. And we are ready to do State of Indonesia report. If somebody wants to champion it, youth report, we'll be happy to collaborate with you. Now, let's go to the next slide, which focuses on inequality. Now, we make a differentiation between inequality and inequities. In every society, there's some level of inequity. In other words, there are aspirations that are never fulfilled. If you go back to the 2010 report, we have very definite parameters by which we measure inequity. Here you see, for instance, that inequity or equity is actually, the concept comes from social justice issue. There are things that families, individuals, communities are never able to do for themselves. For instance, if you are born in a slum, or if you were born to a poor parent, and there are no amenities to correct that situation, if there is no help coming for you from, say, a government or somewhere else, it's very likely that because your parents are poor, you will be poor. Because they are unable to send you to school, they are unable to send you to provide for you the proper health care when you were young. Children die, for instance, because there is no medicine. Children die because there is no vaccine. Mothers die because we have no proper health care when when you go to one part of a city and you go to another, you see clear differences. We have gated communities and we have slums. Now, you find that people who are born in slum conditions are likely also to perpetuate that situation in their own life unless something happens. This is where you find the notion of equity as a very powerful tool. We are not talking about equality of people. We are talking about equity. We are talking about doing things that ensure that everyone has a good head start in life, like free education, free primary, free, from kindergarten level, to ensure that each person has an opportunity to express their talent. Now, what you do with that is now up to you. If the state or the government provide that level playing field, what you now do with it is now up to you. But we argue that the state or someone should provide that level playing field. This is where the notion of equity comes from. For instance, we are not saying that everyone should pay the same tax or everyone should enjoy the tax that was collected from somewhere else. We are saying that when you were born, there must be a platform for all children and young people to be given an opportunity to go to school, to have opportunities for open space. If they have talent for sports, for instance, there must be amenities where they can express themselves, and somebody will be able to pick them up and say, this one can do one thing or the other. But the world is not structured in that way, unfortunately. And many governments still do not realize that we lose a lot when we don't give opportunities to people because of the level of their parents' wealth, or the color of their skin, or their ethnicity or caste. We argue against those kinds of prejudices that come from lack of knowledge of who a young person is. We argue for equality of opportunity. As you see here, this is a very amazing number. 62 richest people own the same wealth as 3.6 billion of the poorest people in the world. In other words, I don't know how many people are here, and you represent the billionaires, you own half of the whole world owns, basically, or will own in 2050. For now, you actually own what maybe about 70% of the world. This is the real, it's a very real demonstration of inequity in the world. And we find that much of what is happening in the world now, they are the ones that are less taxed when you look at proportionality of taxation, for instance. They are the ones that get everything and the poor don't get much. Next slide. Again, as you see, inequality is rising all over the world, even in traditional societies where equity used to be. For instance, the US now, the middle class have really suffered a lot if you compare with maybe 20, 30 years ago, because of what has happened with globalization and so forth. And the rise of people like Mr. Trump has to do much with what you see with inequity all over the world. People fear stoned, people are scared about those who don't look like them and so forth. People are scared about migration. Because erroneously people believe that, some people are made to believe that when you have someone coming to your country, they take away your jobs. It's not always true. Next slide. So why do we focus on it? We focus on it because they are very important. It's not going to stop. We focus on it because the way economies grow, it's very likely that it will be exacerbated. And therefore we need to take legal and economic steps and policies to address inequality and the inequities in cities. We focus on it because there are certain roots of inequity that we can address. For instance, we can address the formation of slums in our cities. And as you know very well, slums are areas where you don't have basic things like water, sanitation, where rooms are people live in overcrowded rooms. We can use policies to address those issues. Therefore, this is why we focus on them. We focus on them also because we see a rising of inequities all over the world. In fact, we did a report recently jointly with WHO called the Hidden Cities. It's called Health Inequities in Cities. There are a lot of people who are dying in many of our cities that we don't even know because we don't have access to the most basic medicine. And we also see even growing inequities in the richer countries. People falling into poor poverty in so-called advanced industrial countries. So we need to focus on those sets of people to ensure that our world is not further polarized. Rural areas used to be the areas where we find a lot of poverty, but we find the same in cities. Now, what the difference here is that in cities, the amenities are there, but people have, in mathematics, you always have necessary and sufficient conditions for everything. But what we find is that education is necessary, but oftentimes it's not sufficient for you to get the right jobs, for you to move up the ladder of wealth, for instance. Next one. Now, in the next couple of years, I'm sure we're going to be focusing a lot more on these goals. As many of you are aware, we now have 17 SDG goals. SDG 11 is the one that focuses specifically on cities. But there are other contiguous goals here, like 4, 5, 8, 10, 11. For those of you who are not familiar with them, I would encourage you to Google and find out exactly what these goals mean and what it might mean for you as a young person and for your city, for example. Next slide. Let me try to wind up now. Now, what we have done for this particular report is to broaden the methodology. Over the last few reports, we had focused on maybe 4 or 5 cities, but for the first time, because of course, the Quito, what we are doing here today and what we are going to be doing in Quito in October, we have several more countries included in this report. And as you can see them here, we try to cover almost all the countries in the south. So the results or some of the preliminary reports you're going to see Sheila is going to present in a short while. Yeah, next slide. The outputs, now you find we had focused discussions in 28 cities. We had over 1,000 questionnaires that were filled. We had key informant interview case studies. We are also thinking, for instance, that we're going to have separate city reports. We hope we can do that from this broader report. So that all the countries where we have, or what you call the countries reports, are going to be produced separately from this, apart from the broad report, the synthesis for the global system of report. It's a very complex sort of methodology, but we think it's far more superior to simply just doing one and not the other. Maybe later on we'll explain a bit more, so I don't take too much time. Let's go to the next slide. So the key highlights that is going to be elaborated by Sheila as follows. You see a rising percentage of young people in cities we call the youth bulge, and increase a lot of burden on society when we don't plan for it in advance. Youth actually for us is an investment. The notion of having young people are the ones who create innovation in cities. They are the ones with the energy. And for many cities, for many countries, they sort of profile young people as troublesome, people who get into criminalities. But cities need to ask themselves questions also, whether they provided the right opportunity for these young people. we see rising unemployment and what we call working poor. Working poor categories are those who are working. They work, but it's never enough. The wages they earn is never enough. We see a lot of migratory complexities. We see issues of transport and public space, slum and informal housing, access to health services, then of course the inclusionary issues that we are talking about, and then of course gender inequality. These issues we are going to find in the main report, and I will encourage all of you, in whichever area you are interested, to begin to focus on those, because they are each by themselves are very huge issues that can be really looked at in more depth. I think this is basically all there is to my introduction. Thank you very much, and we look forward to interacting with all of you today and days to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Banju. As you can see, it's a very extensive report. And what's been really lucky for us is we've been able to bring together some of the authors of the reports, hopefully both here, both physically here as well as virtually. So I'd like to turn it over to one of the people who was key to getting the report together, who received all the information from all the different countries, and I can't imagine how she did it because it was very great. Anyways, I'd like to pass it over to Sheila.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Prof, and thank you, Habitat, for the opportunity to be involved in something so ambitious, so important. And they say that if you don't measure something, you can't even begin to address it. And so it's really great to get a big picture view of something quite so complex. Could you please put back the slide, Prof, because there are slides following. So I'm expanding on those 12 issues. Yes. So there's slides that continue that expand on each of them, and we'll talk about how sort of aggregate what we call megatrends. What we see in the broader report, as there are so many different countries and so much diversity, that there are very unique differences in so particular kind of peculiarities. So, but these are the broad commonalities that the report shows, and I think it's important to highlight. So, next slide, please. So, the youth bulge. This is talked about a lot in Africa, I'm sure in Asia. Numbers of young people are rising, and the narrative sometimes talks about the benefit. This is a great dividend. This is going to be wonderful for our future. But at the same time, for many countries, it's a big burden because they haven't prepared for it. They don't have the resources to support the growth of young people. So that's why the title is there's a youth bulge, and is it a benefit or is it a burden? And inclusive economic policies are probably developed to embrace this particular demographic trend. And mostly it's because the instruments that governments use to measure economic growth focus very much on things like GDP, and when they look at poverty indices, the poverty indices sometimes mask a lot of the story about what real poverty is. So poverty is set at a particular number, but living on $2 a day in one particular city is very different from another city in a different region. So poverty, so these figures can mask poverty a lot. And also, inequality is not well measured, mostly because it's hard to estimate the top level incomes, and we just don't have that kind of data. But what's really nice about this time in the world of development and economics is that inequality is the conversation of the moment. We are getting better data that's coming out, bigger studies from economists such as Thomas Piketty, and so we're really getting to grips with what inequality is, and we look forward to that particular knowledge changing how we do things. Next slide, please. So unemployed or working poor. So in many countries they'll say that employment levels are lower. So you see that unemployment doesn't seem very high. Yet people are poor, especially young people. So because they're not earning a living wage, they're in very insecure jobs. So young people in many African and Asian countries are falling into the category of the working poor, especially in urban settings. And this is making transition to adulthood very, very difficult. This is a global trend. So even in the UK, in Europe, young people are not being able to become adults in the way we've understood it, being economically independent, owning their own homes, forming their own family units, because they just don't have the capacity, and that trend may continue. It's very sad, and it's changing how we live our cultures worldwide. Next slide, please. Access to quality education. So there's been a lot, especially with MDGs, a lot of focus on enrollment numbers, getting people at primary level, secondary school level, and that's been good because before literacy was an issue in many countries, and in broadly those numbers have gotten better. Literacy has improved, but the quality varies dramatically from country to country, and even within countries, from city to city. So capital cities which tend to have very good quality schools, and others don't in rural areas. So we have to begin to look at where our focus is. Is it in enrollment and completion? We have to look at what our attainment aspirations are for our young people. And in Asia, where you're seeing high levels of enrollment and fairly high levels of attainment, but perhaps what is not coming out is that post-degree employability levels are low because graduates are not ready for employment, and so they're finding it hard to go into jobs because they don't have the hard or the soft skills that are necessary for particular kinds of career paths. So we have to look at the quality of education in Africa and Asia just broadly. Also, in all the countries, the recommendation that comes up time and time again is about improving vocational training. And we say that, and it's been said in other youth reports, it continues to show up, and it shows up because things have not changed. Vocational training institutions, the number, the quality are not expanding. But perhaps also the other thing that we should begin to look at is what types of vocational training courses and skills do we really want to develop for young people now. So before we think about trades like carpentry, plumbing, all this sort of stuff, sewing, but really now biology is a very important part of how young people learn, interact, and do things. So we have to look at how technology can be a cross-cutting factor in incorporating technology skills in vocational training courses and looking at more vocational technological skill set, because that's exciting for young people. It comes much more naturally, and perhaps that's an area where they can grow into. Next slide. Youth and migration. Migration is a big issue within countries, to rural migration, so that's big in Africa and Asia. Also, as young people leaving the country, international migration. And it's different in different countries. The push and pull factors, sometimes it's economic, sometimes it's conflict, and many or just the allure of a city or another region. One of the trends that came out in the Cambodia city report is that there's a lot of in-migration, which is prevalent in Phnom Penh and in a number of secondary cities as well. Next slide. Slums and informal housing. So in Africa particularly and in Asia, the growth of slums is documented, and I think in Asia it's perhaps slowing down, the growth of slums and informal housing, and it's being addressed and tackled. In in Africa, it is still a trend that is rising. And as our opening speaker, I don't know if anybody was here in the first session and heard the opening speaker. She spoke about generations growing up in slums. And that's worrying and different because perhaps their parents or their parents, when they went into something, they thought it was a transition. So they thought it's a place where I'll find my feet, organize my life, and I'll have a better life. But now you're finding young people that are second or third generation in slums. And so the idea that they can ever live another life is becoming further and further away. And that becomes very dangerous when people are living in those conditions and become hopeless of a change in their future. So that sense of hopelessness and entrenched poverty has to be addressed. We see it a lot in Kenya. So we see it a lot in Kibera and Mathare in Kenya, but we are beginning to see in those slums as well a few examples of young entrepreneurs who are just getting to grips with their situation, developing really innovative projects, doing things, recycling or just generating small businesses, and it's very encouraging in some ways. Next slide. Transportation and public spaces. So it was interesting here to see the motorbike transport riders. We have a lot of that across Africa. We have different names for it in Kenya. In Kenya, they're called boda drivers, and it's where a lot of unemployed young people go to. So that's where they find employment. And the government finds it difficult to regulate. They're not entirely sure that they like the growth of that. They're afraid of other unstable aspects, criminality that may go with that in countries, especially West Africa, about motorcycle riders. But what was interesting to find out here is that in Asia, technology is being applied to how you can get a motorcycle ride. So kind of like for motorbikes, which I found really exciting, and something we haven't seen in Africa, it's in Asia. It may be a bridge towards formalization somehow in which it'll become easier to regulate. So that would be very interesting to see how that trend grows. We worked with ActionAid, a partner in Brazil and Liberia, I don't know if that was mentioned, and in South Africa. And they were very concerned about the issue of public safety for women and girls, public transport. And it's a big issue. Young women can't go to certain areas at certain times, and so their access to the city where they can go when is highly restricted. So the focus, a key feature of that were public safety issues in cities in Brazil. It occurs in Palestine and in Somalia for different reasons, because these are fragile and complicated states. And the issue of public spaces, access to public spaces for recreation, for enjoyment, is a big one all over, in all the countries that we sampled. We understand that for Asia, from some of the trends, that there is an increasing trend for governments to be selling public land to private developers. So you're seeing a proliferation of malls and other kinds of private developments that are taking the public space and squeezing out where young people can congregate, what they can do and socialize. And this is a worrying trend that we have to really look at. Okay, next one. Access to health services. So what you find in many developing countries is that there's a focus on the under 5, so and there's a lot of data around child health and getting children vaccinated and keeping them alive up to beyond 5. And then the data there's a kind of a data gap and the policy gap as well. So you find that adolescents who have their own peculiar health needs and that which needs attention. There isn't a particular focus around adolescent health in any of the countries that we saw, and so that's a gap that we want to highlight to improve outcomes for young people, especially when it comes to mental health issues and reproductive health. Political inclusion, exclusion, yes. So many, in the focus group discussions, many of the young people said they're used by politicians at particular times in the election calendar. They would find that they were given some kind of access, some kind of voice, allowed a level of participation which made it look like the political systems were inclusive. But after the elections, their issues go to the back burner and the cycle, and they find that there's very little scope for implementation, and they find years pass and then they come back again. It's a worrying kind of mask of inclusion, and so we have to look, is it really inclusion? Is the participation really making a change? Are they really on the decision-making table? Many young people felt that they were not. One of the Asian cities where there was a particular feedback, which I think should be brought up, is about the post-disaster reconstruction in Nepal, where young people were brought to be part of that. They were mobilized to participate in the early stages. But then when it comes to the longer-term planning of the cities, they're not part of those groups and part of those decision-making tables. So how can they have the opportunity to contribute to the redesign of more cities that are friendly to them? And now the post-disaster which in its way, so there's an opportunity to do something a little differently. Palestine is an interesting city report, and I really, when it's published, urge you to read it, because so many things are very peculiar and not part of general trends, because it's a very particular situation where you have an occupied territories and settler communities, so it's a lot of internal tension and a lot of barriers to opportunities of all sorts. And strangely, it's the only only cities where young people are fairly well educated and fairly high quality graduates, but yet that does not give them better access to jobs or opportunities at all. So education does not really open up any doors for young people in Palestine. And so the level of disillusionment, etc., as you can imagine, with all the other issues, is very high. Okay, next one. Youth and state fragility. So in many countries, we're finding this increasingly across the world and across particular areas in Africa. Many countries, militant groups are recruiting disenfranchised youth. So you're finding that in areas where there has been levels of historic disadvantage, poverty that has gone on for generations, and a lack of hope in a large youth population, that they're becoming easy recruits for militant groups. In Africa, Al-Shabaab are active in Somalia and Kenya. Boko Haram is spreading across West Africa. And then we have other youth groups, Niger, Delta militants, piracy groups in southeastern Nigeria, and also pirates across the Horn of Africa. Many young people are caught up in those sorts of areas. I guess that's the last one. So, but in Asia, it's interesting where it's an opposite trend, because you have strong states. So the state is very strong. And so the prevailing issue here is that civil society is finding its voice shrinking, and the space for advocacy is smaller and smaller. So the state is doesn't appear to be as fragile as it is in many regions in Africa. Okay, that's it. Gender inequality, patriarchy everywhere. Access to women's jobs, healthcare, etc. Okay, I think that's the last one. Thank you.
So, next up. So thank you very much, Sheila. That was great. And again, really amazing detail and I think really interesting information. Just to what I think, and the point that I want to just pull out there from that large amount of information. There is very little research done on youth. It's mostly children, and it's really good to reaffirm that, because we seem to stop at 18 or some age, and then there's a whole chasm of data that we don't have. And so it's really great to point that out. And a lot of what's missing is what we're starting to fill in. We're starting to see. So next up is Ying, who will discuss some of the stuff that went on in this region around the gathering of data and much more. It seemed to become a festival of data gathering. We're seeing pictures of people having parties and stuff like that. So this is, I think Ying has changed the whole dynamic around participatory research. But she'll go into that more. Thanks. And I've been told we don't have a lot of time, so, but anyways, so just keep it short.
Thanks, Dad. Doug. Okay. Hi. I suspect that some of you here might have participated in our data collection workshop in Georgia. Can we see if anybody is here? Is anyone from Georgia? Okay, Emmy? Yeah, so you know that. So Doug made a great point because we had a lot of data and information and very high-level trend analysis of where youth are, where urban youth are, what does it mean inequality and inequity, and what is inequity between youth, and what is the difference, and what is the regional trend. But before that, it may sound a little dry, but this research definitely was also experienced. So I want to share a little bit of that because I had the privilege to cover the 5-country researches in Asia Pacific. So the framework, because this is also a little bit of what you would experience in the second half of this session, we would do focus group discussions, correct? Yeah, so well, the start of this research is that we want to write a report about youth, with youth. So we gather all the data and do the trend analysis, but we also hear your opinion of inequality and youth development in your city. And we specifically think about economic inequality in youth in your city, political inequality and participation in your city and youth, cultural inequality, environmental inequality, and social inequality. And we really spent a lot of time hearing from you. Usually our focus group discussions in each city range from 2 hours, 3 hours. It's a full day affair. So I want to give feedback from you that is that some of the most fruitful feedback is that how young people define their own problem in surprising ways and in inspiring ways. I remember that Sheila mentioned that in Nepal, a very current context was urban youth and reconstruction of the city of Kathmandu. And it was exactly 1 year after the great earthquake. And there was a feeling that youth really came to the rescue after a big earthquake. They were there doing immediate relief work. They were passionate. They were helping their neighbors. But after 6 months, after 1 year, there is no clear sense that the reconstruction process was involving local youth sustainably. So it really came out strongly, sometimes very bluntly, that young people felt, well, as local youth, we are left out of these reconstruction projects. How can we gain skills participating in this projects? And it makes clear that after the disaster in the cities, the recovery has to take into consideration the long-term needs of young people and long-term development. And I remember that there was one girl from Nepal who, after focus group Asia, we also have the Pacific. So we went to Papua New Guinea and heard from a very different context where climate change is very important, but you're also struggling with safety issues in urban area, gender issues, and then how to have livelihoods, how to make a living, and those are all related, and it's spoken from personal experience. And then we also went to Mongolia, university in Mongolia. I think mainly there's the capital city, Ulaanbaatar, and you think of Mongolia as traditional nomadic country, but actually it's rapidly urbanizing. But the Mongolian context is that the country's economy is very mining and resource driven. So when the country's overall economy is mining, what is jobs for? That was a very interesting question. And then I think with that we mentioned Cambodia, PNG, Mongolia, and then Nepal. So I wanted to to Kevin who will talk about issues that are close to home, experience from Medan and Georgia, and what he found out, and maybe you can add more if you think so.
Yeah, okay. Hello guys, I'm Kevin. I'm a national researcher for the report from Indonesia. And as you can see, it was back in Medan and Yogyakarta we held two FGDs by the help of IYMM, and we held it in February and March in both cities, and both have like about 60 to 70 participants who are very enthusiastic about making changes for the cities. They come from various communities, various organizations, schools, universities, and they're really enthusiastic about voicing their opinions how city will be better in the future. Yeah, the first one was Medan about how they tentang Medan and Medan cities and around communities, and they were very strongly voicing how there is this social by local leadership. As you can see in Medan, there was a high rate of corruption, the police and government officials. They tend to take the matter into their own hands, and because they start creating new communities, and the leaders they create schools for the citizens can get to know their city better. There are many other similar communities, and they also urge how the government should become more transparent and effective and involving the youth in the decision making process for the city. So the next one was in Jakarta, and the help of Andy and Project. We made a very fruitful discussion in Jakarta, where we discussed about concerning about how the growing population in Jakarta is starting to strain the limited urban space, because there's not really big provinces, small country, and then the organizing areas is facing erosion of the economic values, namely the Tokyo, as you may have heard, where in the rural areas people are more communal, and they tend to be more individualistic when they come to the cities when the city is urbanizing. And then there are calls for inclusion of local culture and heritage subjects in their education curriculum. So they feel that the spirit of local culture should be instilled from a very young age, from the primary education onwards to the perhaps even universities have to relearn about respecting and preserving their local heritage culture. It is a strong message implied in the Jakarta discussion. And to keep it short, those are the comments from the Indonesian youth about their contributions to the state of urban youth report and how it is staying.
Thank you, Kevin. And Kevin touched on a really good point, because this research, when we brought this common global research platform to each city, was a great excuse and opportunity for Habitat to get connected to local organizations. And Cambodia, we had a senator to interact at the end. In Kathmandu, we also had the national youth ministry to come. So it was the report itself, I would say, one of the recommendations is that we need civic space, we need a neutral space. Young people want that space to be able to engage with policy questions. Actually, the report itself was like that. So that is a surprising gift that we had. And now we really want to look, I think, to get feedback from you how to continue to make this report not only a report but also an experience, a useful tool to you, some of whom live in the research city of Georgia.
Great. And I'll speak briefly. We'll ask Sunny from China just to briefly update us on development there.
Okay, as a last speaker, I want to mention a little about the Chinese educational equity and youth development. I'm a graduate student from Shanghai International Studies University, and Shanghai is a fairly large metropolis with fairly equal opportunities offering for different youngsters. But 2 months ago, my roommate and I got the admission letters from Edinburgh University from the UK. But at last, I couldn't be admitted to this university because my family couldn't afford the tuition fee for me. So that is the economic inequality lead to my not being admitted to this famous university. So my case is not like in China, where many college students cannot receive their best education, their desired education. And also in many western areas and mountainous areas, many children are forced to leave school at a very early age. But from the report of 1915, we can see that many children, especially in those big cities like Shanghai, Beijing, the situation is improving because many open-style teaching is available to different levels, regardless of their gender, their family background, and also those intelligently challenged students can get their education and to integrate themselves into the society. So, lastly, I want to mention China's specific policy of migration from rural areas to urban areas. And I'm just one part of the migrants that is Hukou system, and this is household registration system. And I believe this policy is really good, made by the policymaker, made by the government, because it is sort of accumulation system. It makes the big city to absorb those talents from rural areas. Like me, an ordinary girl from a rural area of a small county, now is able to be absorbed by Shanghai travelers, and I'm really exciting. But unfortunately, my boyfriend told me that maybe at last we couldn't live in Shanghai because of the high price of the housing. So, tracing back to the root causes, that is the economic inequality that hindered our pace of moving into urban areas. So, in conclusion, I want to mention that it is the government's responsibility to offer opportunities to offspring from poor families. And also, it is our youngsters' responsibility to grasp every opportunities we can reach. So maybe for my offsprings, I can offer the tuition fee for him or her, and to go to universities abroad and to get the best education he or she wants. So that's all. Thank you.
So now I'd like to take a couple questions from the audience, and then we'll break into groups. So, if you have any questions?
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Suat. I'm from Urban Care Community in Surabaya. My English is not good, so I want to ask in Indonesia. So my friend will help me to translate in English. Di Surabaya kita punya basis komunitas namanya Urban Care Community. Kita fokus di kampung-kampung kumuh Surabaya. Di Surabaya beberapa ada kampung-kampung kumuh, ada kalau di data Surabaya memberikan ada sekitar 0,7% dari seluruh bagian utara, ada 0,7% di Surabaya yang kampung kumuh. Jadi di poin habitat ini ada di fokus, ada di apa namanya report tantangannya ada satu poin yang tentang kampung kumuh. Jadi yang ingin saya tanyakan tadi, bagaimana mengatasi permasalahan di perkotaan terkait permasalahan kampung kumuh, sedangkan ada gap antara bangsa dengan kampung kumuh. Karena munculnya kampung kumuh ini sebenarnya bukan salah mereka, salah masyarakat yang tinggal di situ, salah satu bagian dari kesalahan mereka. Tapi ada kebijakan pemerintah yang harus juga ikut andil. Bukan hanya sekedar digusur, tapi bukan juga dirusulkan gitu. Nah, yang kedua, jadi pertanyaan saya bagaimana peran pemerintah untuk itu. Yang kedua, pemuda di kota, yang people di kota itu tidak begitu peka karena kehidupan individualistiknya yang katakan sangat terbuka, sehingga pribadi-pribadi pemuda ini kurang peka. Dan kita untuk mengajak para pemuda khususnya di lingkungan mahasiswa itu sangat berat. Mungkin ada masukan dari pemateri.
He is also from Urban Care Community. His community is working in the slums area of Surabaya, and Surabaya has 0.7% of its lands considered as slum area. And her motivation is that how should the government work, and how should the urban youth work to make sure that the rights to the cities are provided also in the slums area. We want the gap between the huge buildings and also huge economic force behind it. The gap is really big between the slums and also those kind of areas. That's the first question. The second question is how do you engage more into this kind of advocacy? Because sometimes we know youth, they are not really into this kind of advocacy, especially the ones that include slums area living in.
Great question. Anyone can take question number one?
I would answer with two quick questions, two quick examples. So one is from Mongolia. In Ulaanbaatar, it's actually I think 60% informal, because a lot of people have set up traditional Mongolian tent communities in the outskirts. So a lot of people live there. One of the things that keeps them done is they are part of the neighborhood association, and they have a very active member of the community. They do mapping and they use technology and first document, and that's the start of advocacy that I have seen. The other is in terms of more advocacy for youth, right, to be effective advocates. I think we talk a lot about technology and like those young people to get engaged in government, but that's not automatic. And if we talk about that's a bit generic, and I would recommend you to talk to the foundation who's here today. And the tool that they made us speech in the Urban Youth Academy is exactly something that bridges that gap, that brings some of the urban planning skills and then soft skills, like how to talk to the government, how to do negotiation, how to engage stakeholders in your neighborhood. That sort of practical information is there. So I say, this actually is a great place to learn about that.
So I just want to say something from an experience I had years ago in Dharavi, which is one of the biggest slums in India, Mumbai. And a great starting point for advocacy around slum development is first of all mapping the assets, because when people look at slum, they just think, oh, there's nothing here, it's terrible, and you just, but there are assets there. There's ecosystems of relationships that allow people to behave in certain ways, and often slums, especially like Dharavi, serving the city, so waste management, collection, and all of that. And when people in the slums stopped doing that, actually the city could function well. And once, when the government wanted to just get rid of the slum, they were able to show that they provided some service. It seemed invisible to the city, and then the negotiation and the conversation about how this relationship could be improved, their lives could be improved, and they could continue to support the city. So mapping assets, and if you can, looking at the economic worth of your community in terms of the relationship it has with surrounding communities, because you have a relationship, slum dwellers. And also the other thing is looking at how, funnily enough, almost all slums are very expensive. They're more expensive to live in slums in some ways than it is to live in other areas. Poor people pay more for things like water, basic services are generally 2 or 3 times within slum areas than they are just outside. And the inequity also should be mapped and documented.
Really great points. Just based on the asset-based thing as well, one of the key aspects of how we deal as human habitat with huge issues, what we call human-led development is really looking not just at a financial capital asset base, but also at social capital. And the ability to map and understand the social and financial capital of your community is where to start, because there's kind of 2 sides to development. Sometimes you can look at the social and financial capital you can build on, or you look on the deficit. Deficit-based development, it all becomes incredibly hard to get anywhere because there's always a hole to fill. So, I think we're very late, and I didn't see any other hands, but my eyesight is going, so that might not be the case. But nonetheless, I understand that there's facilitators. Can you put your hands up? So, there's facilitators who are going to facilitate different groups. So the facilitators maybe can come down front. That's okay. And then those facilitators can you go to each of those facilitators, and there's going to be groups. And I believe Sheila has questions that the groups are going to ask. Great. So facilitators here. And then there's Sheila who has the mic to you.
We're so happy that you could be here, that we can get some sort of conversation or feedback around the major dimensions that we've been discussing all through the year in the preparation of this report. The sort of 5 dimensions of equity and inequity: economic, social, cultural, what was the other one? The questions are there. Political, and added one which we thought would perhaps be important for this region, which is looking at environmental and ecological dimensions, so that we can begin to have some input on how we feel about that. So we structured very open-ended questions, 3 questions per group. So you have time to have a conversation about that and give us some feedback as to what your conversation brought up, what highlights there are. And we want to see if new and interesting things come out that we can put in the report as your voice, so that your voices can actually appear and that we can quote you directly in your responses. So we're hoping to get some interesting feedback from this group. There are 5 groups here. There are 5 sections, so there are 10, so I don't know how you're going to find yourselves.
Okay, how to bring the positions. For all of you who are sitting over there, this is this is the person who will guide you or facilitate you on the economic activities points. This is maybe a normal total area for your groups to discuss. You could take your seat and take some leads from here, but make sure to make it in time. And then for all of you who are in the first and the second and also the third row of the middle seats, you're going to have social activities to be discussed by these partners ladies. For all of you on the right base, we're going to be facilitated by these two partners ladies also on cultural activities. For all of you on the right side of the middle area, over there, we're going to be facilitated by these two ladies on political activities. And the last one, for all of you who are sitting on the left side of the middle seats, you're going to be facilitated on environmental and ecological dimensions. We will provide you with one carton with a counselor and one marker for you to create ideas to make an imagery of the idea. And if you have anything coming up from your discussions in your groups, please don't hesitate to write your comments, your statements, to just the photograph of it, and post it on Twitter and hashtag HH3U in the recover of this event. We encourage you to have a comfortable seating. It's okay for you to sit in the floor or somewhere outside this plenary hall, but no corner in the foyer area to make sure you have a comfortable discussion station. For all of you live streaming from Jakarta, from Kathmandu, Nepal, Bangkok, Ulaanbaatar, from Manila. We also going to have the live streaming sessions, and you can do your own focus group discussions until 1 p.m. Jakarta time. Once again, for all of you, from live streaming from Jakarta, Bangkok, Manila, Ulaanbaatar, Phnom Penh, and Kathmandu, live streaming from Microsoft offices and also UN offices. We are going to have the live streaming, and we will have you to have your own focus group discussions. The live streaming will be read by 2 p.m. Jakarta time, and you are please to have the focus group discussions until 1 p.m. Jakarta time.
And live streaming will be back soon.